All right, welcome back, class. We're going to start on Chapter 6, Recruiting. Before that, though, I'd really like to urge you to keep doing what you're doing. As you read Casio, as you watch these videos, stay hungry for tips and ideas that you can use to make yourself a more effective manager and that you can use to make your organization more effective, that you can use to help your organization better manage people, to get more output, more motivation, more job satisfaction. You can improve employees' quality of life. You can improve organizational functioning, profits, revenues, goal attainment. So really stay hungry. If you're not working now, project in the future. What do I want to use from this chapter when I'm the boss, when I'm the manager? What do I want to work on? And as I said before, it's good to notice things that you or your company do right, but please stay hungry for things that you need to do better on as an individual. Feel free to write about those. They'll stay with me. I'll protect your confidentiality. And things that your organization isn't doing that it could be. So stay hungry for new things, not just confirming things you already know, new things that you didn't know before that sound like they would enhance effectiveness for you or your organization. All right, with Chapter 6, Recruiting, Casio notes that recruitment is a form of a business contest, and it is fiercely competitive. I'll say that again. He says recruitment is a form of a business contest, and it is fiercely competitive. That generally is true, even in markets where there are a lot of unemployed and it's easy to hire. Generally, the very best people still are going to be sought after and harder to get. So I really like that characterization, and that's the mindset that I would adopt as a manager with a position to fill, that this is a contest and I'm going to have to compete smart, I'm going to have to be effective in my recruiting practices, or I'm not going to get the best talent. And we know what happens when you don't get the best talent. They're working for somebody else, potentially for your competitor. So I think the managerial implication of that is that organizations are clearly competing for talent. It will be tough to get the best people, and that recruiting will have to be clever and convincing. Recruiting can have significant effects on an organization's success and survival. So how effectively we apply the practices learned in this chapter truly will affect the success and survival of your organizations. Casio introduces the concepts of tight versus loose labor markets. That's worth noting. A tight labor market is when demand by employers exceeds the available supply of workers. So back in the 1990s with computer programmers, this was a very tight labor market, particularly as we were approaching the year 2000 and there were a lot of concerns about that so-called Y2K problem that really didn't turn out to be a problem. So you can have these situations where it's very difficult to fill positions. There's more demand from employers wanting to hire than there is a supply in the marketplace. That makes it tough. In those instances, organizations have to be much more creative and responsive during these tight markets. During loose markets, a little bit easier. Some problems can crop up there too. I think you can be flooded with applicants, many of which might not be very well prepared for the position. But at least employers at that point in the loose markets where there's a lot of people seeking work can be rather choosy or selective in who they end up hiring. It's worth noting what Casio says: employers do not face a single homogeneous market for labor, but rather a series of discontinuous segmented labor markets over which supply and demand conditions vary substantially. That is absolutely true. I've seen this in action, and it can be pretty interesting. There was an organization in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I used to work, and this was one of those organizations that was kind of enviable because they were seen as a desirable employer. They were kind of the place to work in Fort Wayne. And so when they had a job fair, they had hundreds or maybe even 1,000 people flood this job. A job fair is a recruiting event to interest applicants in applying for positions and collect a lot of resumes and applications. And it's kind of a sharing event where applicants can talk to company representatives. Anyway, this company, because it was seen as a desirable employer, just was mobbed with individuals seeking employment. But this was for all kinds of positions, including lower level positions. One of the key positions in this organization, though, was actuaries. I don't know if you've heard of actuaries. It's a very specialized job. And this company had to fight tooth and nail to hire actuaries. So they were competing with other competitors at the national level, not in Fort Wayne, but across the United States for these people that work as actuaries. So they had a very fairly loose labor market for many other positions, especially clerical and lower level positions, and a tight labor market for actuaries. It was difficult for them to fill those positions. So the point of that is to think through, even in good times there may be, for employers in terms of the looseness or number of applicants, there may still be positions that are difficult to fill. And we always want to fill any position with qualified people and presumably the best people we can reasonably hire. The recruitment pipeline is something I wanted to talk a little bit about, because the duration between the receipt of a resume and the time a new hire starts to work can be pretty long, especially for hard to fill positions. I hope I'm making sense there. That recruiting pipeline, from the time that you, probably even before somebody applies, you have to start thinking about the position, maybe doing that job analysis, maybe figuring out where and how to advertise the opening that you're going to have, to the time you have the person sitting at work in the chair doing the work on day one. That can be very long. We want to reduce that pipeline, similar to production. The automakers have sought to reduce the time that they spend from having a new car design on the drawing board, kind of the conceptual model, to the time you can see it in the showroom and sell it. They've consciously worked very hard to reduce that amount of time. And you will need to do the same thing in terms of filling positions. Not to rush it and be slipshod and not do the homework that's necessary to result in a good hire, but just try to keep the process moving, manage it efficiently will be quite important. I would like to give you an example of where that long recruiting pipeline can actually have major effects on an organization. I worked at one organization where when I was a young guy, I was a HR manager for a manufacturing company. When I was hired in on day one, they had been trying to hire a sales manager. So even before I got there, they had begun trying to fill this position of sales manager. And they had interviewed, I think maybe they were just wrapping up, finishing the last of those interviews my first week at this organization. And they didn't really want to hire any of that. I think they brought in 4 or 5 people. They were still kind of fixated on a person that they had liked from a previous effort to fill this position that they couldn't lure away from his current company. And so we started this process of trying to fill the position, and our the corporation that owned the company where I worked had a corporate recruiter. Fortunately for me, this guy was responsible for filling the position. But I guess my point is, it went on for months and months, and I worked at this company for 1.5 years, so the whole time I was there, we did not have a sales manager. I could tell a story at some point about how we found this sales manager that we ended up hiring, but sitting there with an empty position, a key position like sales manager, for probably almost 2 years, hurt our company. We lost a lot of market share. I don't think it was all because we lacked a sales manager, but certainly that was a contributor. And that company ended up as it lost market share, having to downsize, and actually that company doesn't exist anymore. So certainly not all due to the lack of a sales manager, but it had a measurable, significant effect on that company's performance. So the pipeline and ineffective recruiting can hurt a company. I think I will tell a story about how we did find the candidate. I had mentioned that the corporate recruiter was responsible for filling the position we were trying to fill, but I was obviously concerned as an HR manager in watching what was happening to my company with that position vacant. So I was thinking about, how do you find these people that make good sales managers? Just because you're a good salesperson in no way means that you're going to be a good sales manager. So it's a kind of a unique combination of skills. Probably first and foremost, you have to be a good manager. You're managing other salespeople. You're not probably doing too much selling, actually. So you have to be a good manager. You have to have the technical knowledge and the background as a salesperson. So how many people can do both, be effective at sales and effective at managing others? It definitely reduces the number of candidates. Anyway, I thought, who in my company sees more sales management type people than anybody else? Well, we had a purchasing group, and the particular individual in that group was called a buyer. So he would buy stuff for our company. Certainly I thought, this guy must run into some sales management type people, not just sales people. And I asked him if he'd seen any SHARP, that's slang for smart, intelligent, effective sales management people. And he kind of went to his business card file and flipped through, and he says, as a matter of fact, I have. He pulled out a name, and so I gave that name to the corporate recruiter. That's the person that we ended up hiring at the point that we started to downsize. And so sometimes you can be kind of creative and I don't know what that is, resourceful in terms of your recruiting. Think through what resources you have on site that could help you recruit. And a lot of times the existing employees can be helpful through referrals of that nature. Employee referrals tend to be very effective, and in the book we'll talk about that as well. Cassio talks about the effectiveness of employee referrals, even to the extent some companies, for hard to fill positions, offer some pretty substantial rewards for effective referrals that end up resulting in hires. All right, I would like to shift gears just slightly and talk about delays in the recruitment process. So delays in the recruitment process tend to be perceived very negatively by applicants. So when I've applied for a job, say potentially, even if I've applied, I want to hear back, yes, somebody's received my application. If I don't hear back, again, I'm going to start wondering, did they receive my application? If they did, what's wrong with this company? That seems a little impolite that they haven't acknowledged receipt. So the wheels start turning. I start thinking and making attributions, often negative attributions about the company. I think particularly if I've gone on an interview and I'm waiting to hear back, I'm going to start making negative attributions if the days keep clicking by and I'm not hearing from the company. So I'm going to start thinking something like, something's wrong with this organization. They don't seem like they have their act together. They don't seem very organized. I'm not sure that I would want to work there. So think about it. Which candidates are you most likely to lose if you don't manage your recruiting activities properly? I think you're most likely to lose the candidates who have a lot of choice. In other words, the most marketable candidates. In other words, the candidates you generally want to hire are going to be the ones that say, forget this company, they don't seem very polite, or they don't seem like they have their act together. I don't think I'll accept an offer even if it does come through. So the managerial implication is, it's difficult to do this, but you must stay very responsive and organized and efficient in your recruiting activities. I'd like to also point out how the personal touch can be important. Sometimes particularly with those applicants that have choices, the marketable ones, that personal touch can make the difference. So the future boss calling up and saying, I know you received our job offer letter, but I would like to talk to you and tell you I really want you here working for me. It's very important to me. I hope you'll accept this job offer. I know we can do great things together. So those kind of personal touches, those phone calls, surprisingly make a difference a high percentage of the time. I've seen it happen on myself, and maybe some of you have had similar experiences. So sometimes people are kind of wavering about whether to stay or go or accept this offer or that one. That personal touch can make a significant difference, and it's probably well worth your while if you have a candidate that you'd really like to hire to kind of, as we say in the United States, pull out all the stops and do pretty much whatever you can do to tip the scale in your favor. I think one thing I wanted to note was where Cassio says, analyze the performance of various recruitment sources systematically. I really believe that's important. Is it easy to do? Not really, because you have to take time to do it. Once you fill a position, you kind of want to go to work, you've got to train this person. But this is one of those things that will have big payoffs. If you can schedule that in, force it to happen, evaluate the performance of the various recruitment sources, which media that you advertised in generated the most applicants, which media or recruitment source provided the best applicants. Those kind of things will help you spend your money much more effectively and be more efficient next time you need to recruit. And that's, again, back to the competitive contest. That's extremely useful information. Plus, keep in mind, recruiting is expensive. Ads tend to be surprisingly expensive, especially in some of the more desirable outlets. So knowing which work and which don't, and which is a good investment in the recruiting funds is really, really important. I'd like to share a couple of examples somewhat related to this. Actually, I was a college recruiter for Ford Motor Company in my younger days, kind of one of my first, not my very first, but one of my first jobs in human resources, actually my third job at Ford. I was a college recruiter, so I was working at engineering division. We would go compete for some of the best engineering graduates in the country. And I remember one instance in particularly, we had a, obviously at this time there weren't a whole lot of female engineers working at Ford Motor Company, but that was a category that was somewhat underutilized. In other words, we needed to recruit and hire more female engineers and more engineers in general. And there was a female engineer graduating, I think it was Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley campus. Very good school, definitely somewhere up in the top 20 engineering schools in the United States. And this young woman, I tried some of that personal touch to recruit her. It probably would have been, as an HR person, I could do that to some extent. It's probably even more effective for whoever would have been her boss to do it. And we may have tried that too, but all I remember is that her two choices, she was kind of torn when I called her on the phone between working for us, electronics division, Ford Motor Company, or going to work somewhere in California and working on the space shuttle, which this would have been the late 1980s, so space shuttle wasn't brand new, but it was still fairly cutting edge technology, and it just kind of struck me the difficulty of recruiting somebody with a choice like that to come live in the Detroit, actually Dearborn, but still the Detroit metro area, and work for a car company. Maybe she would design something interesting. Maybe she would design something like a door handle, and versus work on the space shuttle and live in California. So it can be difficult, and I'm leading up to the idea of analyzing your recruitment sources carefully and choosing those with the best yield for your organization. Another example, again, we went to the top 20 engineering schools and tried to recruit electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, some materials engineers. And so we pulled out all the stops, as I said earlier, and me and another recruiter went out to Stanford, and I think we brought at least one or two of our Ford engineers. So this is Stanford University, super high prestige university, well up in the top 20 engineering schools, beautiful Palo Alto, California, and we did all this fancy stuff to recruit there. And the way I remember it now, I wasn't in this particular job for a real long time, but I don't think we got a single hire from Stanford University. Even when we brought in some of our cars, had a wine and cheese thing the night before where engineers could mingle with our engineering managers and discuss ideas. We did a whole bunch of fancy stuff, and it really didn't yield for us. Versus, there was a school up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Ford is located in Michigan, called Michigan Tech. And so this is not in the top 20 engineering schools, but it's still a pretty respectable engineering school. And we had people from Michigan Tech beating down the doors trying to get jobs at Ford Motor Company. So somewhere like that, these people were already, a lot of them from the Midwest, used to the cold. Working for an auto industry company would be high prestige to them. They would be thrilled to get those jobs. So instead of having to take hardly anybody or zero people from these schools like Stanford, I wonder if we should have kind of refocused more of our efforts on some of these maybe schools that would have given a higher yield for us. Should we have lowered our sights to lower quality engineers? No. I'm not sure that you would have to, though, because to get an engineer for us somewhere like Stanford, we get the top of the class, I don't think we would have. We might have gotten kind of middle of the class type engineers from Stanford, whereas we could have had the best of the best from somewhere like Michigan Tech. So, point being, just kind of analyze the yields and the most effective sources. I don't want to over-talk that point, but you want to spend money wisely, and I think Casio gives a good example of that. Corning learned about its target group's media habits, and they found that networks and personal referrals worked better than job boards for that group that they had targeted with their recruiting, is another example. So find out the best ways to reach and influence your target audience. Otherwise, you can waste money to no avail. All right, shift gears again slightly. As an applicant, what do you want from a recruiter? I'm asking you, take a moment and think about it. When you're applying for a job, when you're interviewing, when you go visit a company or in that high stress situation trying to compete for a job offer, what would you like from a recruiter? And then how important is it for the recruiter to be young and cool, particularly recruiting on college campuses? How important is the recruiter? Is it for the recruiter to be young and cool, hip, slang with it, stylishly dressed, flashy, versus maybe a middle-aged person from the company with a lot of experience that maybe isn't a little bit more boring in their manner of dress and personal habits. The research on this is interesting. It says that what we as individuals tend to want from a recruiter is that they're organized, they're well-informed, and they're empathic. Empathetic, some people say empathic. They feel what you're feeling to some extent. That's what I would want in a recruiter. So clearly, to focus back on college recruiting for a moment, the research suggests it's not necessarily important to send a young and cool employee to do the recruiting. It's more important to have somebody who's going to be organized, able to answer applicants' questions in a convincing, definitive, thorough, comprehensive manner, and that they'll be empathic, considerate, polite. So really, that's the kind of person you want to choose to do your recruiting. If you handle it yourself or somebody else handles it, generally, is it better to send an HR person out, if you send somebody out to a job fair for a certain occupation or to a college campus, or is it better to send an individual from the function or department you're trying to recruit for? The research and experience indicates it's probably better in most instances to send the manager from the department or occupation you're trying to recruit for. Again, if you can find somebody who's empathic, organized, knowledgeable. So they can answer questions a lot better. I want to know about the work that I'm going to go into, the department that I work in, what we do. And HR people, unless they're recruiting other HR people, are less able to answer those questions. So managerial implication is choose your recruiters carefully and get them prepared and organized. Hold them accountable. Make your expectations clear. They need to be prepared, organized, polite, and to the full extent possible, empathic and considerate of the applicants. I want to touch on internal recruitment. It's generally a good idea to fill positions from within when you can. You can't always do that. In fact, we could talk all day long about the pros and cons of filling positions externally and internally, but a lot of times the internal recruitment, you know the people a little bit better, you've seen them at work, in your company, that you're more familiar with their track record, and it tends to build some employee loyalty. Look, they try to manage our careers, promote from within, they recognize our talents and contributions. It tends to be a good thing. As I said, you can't always do that. And even with internal recruitment, say somebody's done a good job on a job over here, you move them into another job, they may not do a good job. So you still have to be kind of careful, particularly when recruiting from within for supervisory or management positions. Some people literally flip out, okay, that's slang, they literally really change once they get into supervision or management positions, and they can really fail. So you, especially whether filling from internally or externally, have to be so careful when you hire somebody for a management position where they're affecting so many other people's work and lives. And there are tools for that, and I believe we'll talk about those. One of the tools that we should talk about in selection is the assessment center. And then those are quite helpful for when internal promotions, particularly for management or supervisory positions. The assessment center will help you minimize what I talked about, where somebody seemed to be a good individual contributor but falls flat on their face when they become a boss. External recruitment, sometimes that's necessary, sometimes it can be good, can bring in new ideas, just can be a good thing. You can also get into trouble there if the people internally that felt they were qualified feel resentment over this outsider coming in. So you have to think through you probably should expect that or try to predict it and try to think through your countermeasures that you would take if and when that pops up when you hire from outside. Working with headhunters can be helpful for external recruitment. I've done a lot of that. I wanted to touch on that. Headhunters, there's good ones and bad ones. There's a lot of flaky ones out there. Flaky, another slang term for there's a lot of ineffective headhunters or recruiting people, particularly among the contingency headhunters that only get paid if they fill your position. So what you want to do is build your clientele of headhunters and figure out who's effective. So what's an example of an ineffective headhunter? They don't take time to learn your organizational culture. They don't take time to listen to what you tell them about what you want in applicants and what you don't want. They don't take time to carefully think through the resumes they're getting and whether they're a match for what you're saying. So it takes a lot of homework to be an effective headhunter. You have to get inside the company's head, the recruiting manager's head, about what they want, understand that and honor that. An ineffective headhunter will just be sending you masses of resumes and applications, trying to find somebody through sheer numbers that's a fit so they can make that commission, which can be pretty significant. It could be 35% of the first year's salary for the position if it's filled. So they tend to be hungry. But these people waste your time flooding you with these resumes. They're not even worth working with. So hopefully you can find out through personal experience or networking about these headhunters that are more astute, more considerate, more smart. They'll ask you more questions on the front end about what you want and what type of people work in your company and don't work, about organizational culture. And then they will send you less paperwork and less resumes, but they will be closer fits, and you can narrow down to these people and only work with them in the future. So hopefully you can use that to guide your activities in the external recruitment.